So I want to present on ConnectED, and I don't know by show of hands if anyone knows what the ConnectED initiative is. Great, so we have a lot of new information today. When I started thinking about this conference and you all being state legislators, I want to give you kind of perspective from, a statewide or nationwide perspective on how the challenges are different and different ways that we're going to try to address them. And I actually was looking back at something that Pam had given me as a framework for state policymakers on preparing all students to be college and career ready. And there's a comment in the forward that really stood out to me. It said, what does it say when many of our children are learning essentially the same content in substantially the same way as their parents and their grandparents? 21st century students who are still living and learning in a 20th century way. So I would pose to you an extension of that question and say, what does it say when we know that all students have different access as well? If you're in the inner city, urban areas, you have certain resources. Suburban areas, you may have other resources. In rural areas, you may have different challenges and different needs. And how can we address them in a broader and more equitable way? So when President Obama announced his 2014 budget, one of the big pieces for education that we were just thrilled with was this idea of ConnectED. And the idea in a nutshell is that, as you saw earlier from the group in Oregon, all students need this. And in order to deliver it to all students, we need to make sure that every school and library has the capacity and the robust connections that are needed to deliver this new content in exciting ways. But I want to take a step back and just say that when the administration arrived in 2009, so you had President Obama from Chicago, you had Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, also from the city, longest serving big city superintendent in America. And Arne readily admitted that he didn't know what the differences were, what it was like in faraway places, but he wanted to. And so he created the position I'm in. We've really come up with a kind of a holistic strategy to make government policy and program more flexible and to target investments in ways that they will have a broad impact and address particularly the unique challenges and needs in rural areas. So in a nutshell, what our thought was and our strategy ended up being was, the real needs in rural America, human capital. So if you think about schools and their human capital needs, in rural schools, if you have a vacancy, you may have a very small applicant pool if you have even more than one to replace a teacher or to fill a new vacancy. If you don't have a teacher, you may not be able to have an entire program. So in your states, I assume you have, for example, FFA. Who has FFA programs? So if you don't have an agriculture teacher, you don't have a program. So the human capital needs in rural areas are very different, obviously, than in suburban and urban areas. And we also wanted to try to find ways to build that capacity through partnerships, through engaging the private sector, the philanthropic community, through technical assistance. And everywhere that we've been, I've been to 36 states now since 2009, and Secretary Duncan is very rapidly approaching to a point where he'll have visited every state. And why that's valuable is because superintendents and principals and community leaders have told us time and time and again, while it's not a silver bullet, technology is a tool for actually overcoming some of the challenges we face with distance and isolation, and to connect students with not just college opportunities, but career training opportunities, internships, career and technical education. The world opens up when they have this access to technology and when they have this access to high-speed internet. So when President Obama announced this ConnectED initiative, it was going right at the heart of the issue of equity and access to the tools for learning. When you think about connectivity, so if schools have internet and connections, do they have the capacity and the bandwidth to do the exciting things that are going on in Oregon? Or will they have to kind of take turns? Do they have the training that teachers need to use the tools effectively? I was in North Platte School District here in Missouri yesterday, and they have some exciting things going on there. But the IT director said right up front, we need to have the professional development opportunities for teachers, and not just standard professional development. Bring the technology and the tools that they're going to use in the classroom, and let's do the PD together with the tools, not separately. If we want this to work and not just be another, a fun gadget or toy, we want to really make this a meaningful learning tool. So in order to do that, the president's proposal says, let's make sure that every teacher, every student has those devices, and let's engage the private sector in ways that we can leverage their innovation. I mean, some of the technology that's coming out now is just mind-blowing in certain cases. So how can we challenge the private sector to apply that to education in a way that's cost-effective, in a way that we can do cooperative buying if necessary, find solutions and ways to engage the private sector in ways that we haven't done before to get the tools for learning in an affordable way in the hands of the people who need it, the students and the teachers. So ConnectED builds on the E-Rate program. Is everyone familiar with E-Rate? So Universal Service Fund, you've probably seen the fee on your cell phone bill, for example. And E-Rate did, over the last 20 years, a tremendous job of that initial infrastructure building in schools, wiring schools. And now you see, 93%, 96% of classrooms have some connection. Now, there's two big questions there. If they have the connection, do they have the devices to even use the connection, is the first question. When the Secretary went out on his annual back-to-school tour, this year we went through the Southwest, and I was with him in New Mexico. So in Albuquerque, he flew into Albuquerque, and we visited some schools there. Lots of technology, lots of connectivity, things looked like they were moving in the right direction. Then as we moved further and further away from Albuquerque, you saw less and less. We went to Sakura, New Mexico, which is kind of out in the middle of nowhere, nice little town, built around the school. Everything, social life revolves around that school. And they were proud of what they're doing with technology, and we wanted to go see it. So the innovative thing they did was they have what they call MIT of the Southwest. They have New Mexico Tech in the same town as their district, Sakura. And New Mexico Tech is known for working with Los Alamos and the laboratories and producing engineers. And so Los Alamos said, okay, so there are actual fiber connections to schools in Sakura proper. We need to help you extend those connections. We need to take the anchor that you have and extend it. So they were able to put a tower on a mountain, they called it M Mountain, and do point-to-point high-speed connections to all the other schools in their district, so that those schools also had a high-speed connection through that partnership. That's the capacity building piece that we like to encourage and see as well. So if you think about the context with the President's initiative, if we can wire the anchor institutions, schools and libraries, then communities have an anchor to build off of, a way to extend that connection beyond just the schools and the libraries. And there are examples around the country like Sakura where it's happening in isolation. We need to leverage that and build upon it through E-Rate modernization. So unfortunately, there are millions of students where high-speed broadband is currently out of reach. So in that district, before they worked with New Mexico Tech, some of the schools were still on DSL. They said even some of the schools had dial-up connections. So they had some initial connectivity, but it wasn't up to the speed and the progress that, frankly, the rest of the world is making right now. So if fewer than 20% of educators said that their connection met their teaching needs, we have to find ways to, add their capacity. And since this is the type of a conference where you're going to go back to your states, I figure you'll want to know some resources you can use right now. So I'm going to talk about the ConnectED initiative, but I want to show you also something else. If you've ever heard of a nonprofit called Education Superhighway, if you haven't, it's not a surprise. But they are one of a few nonprofits around the country. And if you go to the State Education Technology Association's website and just search for school speed test, you will see a study they did and a set of nonprofits that do these speed tests. And the reason why that's important is they're free, number one. So you can do free speed tests of not just the advertised internet speed in your school, but the actual internet speed in your school, and see the capacity your school has, and then they can work with you to maximize your existing network. So remember that photograph of the network in Oregon where it looked like a spider web, and that was what he found when he first came to Oregon? They can work with the school to say, let's reconfigure your existing network and get the maximum out of it. And we can test that speed again, and you can see what the improvement will be. So this is a nonprofit that does this work, and there are a few others that do this work as well through the State Education Technology Association, which you can find. It's CETA.org, basically. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. So again, talking about what teachers need, one of the things that they need is the bandwidth issue. So I don't know if you've been in schools and they start talking about this conversion to online testing, online assessments. They talk about having students use computers for either additional enrichment or remediation. Well, all of this happening at once puts a strain on the network. And in many cases, schools have to actually take turns with students. They don't have the bandwidth currently, or they don't have their network configured well enough to have the bandwidth to do what they need. And for teachers who have long been challenged to kind of personalize instruction, differentiate instruction, understand your students' different learning styles and needs, now we have the tools to really do that well, but if we don't have the bandwidth to implement it, it will continue to be a challenge. So only 20% of America's schools currently have the connectivity and bandwidth to do what we're talking about. We're talking about bringing in experts, bringing in video contact, allowing students to collaborate with one another across counties, states, across countries, and etc. And only 10% are wired to support the kind of digital learning that would actually lead to those breakthrough interventions. So if you think about this, in our country, American consumers spend more money for slower service than in some other countries in America. The goal would be for 100 megabits per second, and beyond that, 1 gigabyte per second would be our goal, and many people are still stuck in between 25 and 100. Now, if you think about rural America, places I've been in the mountains of Kentucky, or I went to Ucross, Wyoming for a meeting there where population 25, they just don't have the infrastructure right now or the means to have the kinds of connections in their schools and their libraries that we're talking about. And if we're going to kind of address that equity, I would encourage you to think about looking into the ConnectED initiative further and actually going to the FCC website, fcc.gov/E-rate, and taking a look at their notice that I'll talk about in a second. So if you think about it, we've made a huge investment, especially through the Recovery Act, $7.2 billion, to get rid of T1, DSL, dial-up, and etc. The next leap is to fiber. If you really want to address learning, digital learning, we need fiber connections, high-speed wireless, etc., and that's the next step. So right now, what can we do? What are the resources right now, even beyond ConnectED? Can I see the USDA slide? So in every one of your states, I would encourage you as state leaders to introduce yourselves and get to know your state U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development State Director. If you want to click on the State Directors link, no, that's programs. On the right side should be, there we go. So on the USDA web page, USDA Rural Development web page, you can find the State Director's Office in every state. And this is where, no matter what state I've been to, the state directors always say the same thing to me. Tell your local leaders, tell your schools to do kind of a needs assessment. Do a needs assessment of their technology needs, of their capital needs, school construction, modernization. Are they struggling with the idea that we're recruiting teachers and we don't have housing, suitable housing for them? Let's look at housing. There are a number of things on the capital side that USDA Rural Development can help you with. So they say, do that needs assessment, bring us your wish list. So if you want to click on the programs link and scroll down to community facilities. So the Community Facilities Loans and Grants Program is exactly what I was talking about. Build schools, modernize schools, use technology, and etc. In fact, I'm sure you heard of the President's Preschool for All initiative. So schools are thinking about how are we going to accommodate preschool for all, and how are we going to expand our buildings. If you were to build an extra wing on a school or a classroom using the Community Facilities Program, that same fund would allow you to purchase a school bus to serve the facility. It would also allow you to get the technology you need to really go into digital learning at the early grades. So that would be very useful to find out from the state director. If you could go down to the telecommunications link. So maybe it's up. There's a telecommunications link, and one of the things I wanted to talk about there's a distance learning and telemedicine grant program through USDA. Now it's very competitive, but they provide sizable distance learning grants, and they could be for schools, they could be for colleges, they could be for prisons, they could be for medical facilities. This is another very flexible program where it funds the actual devices and the equipment you need for the kind of digital learning that your communities might be trying to achieve. And the other piece that I'll alert you to is that these programs are pretty broad from the sense of population and poverty also. So there are different requirements. Recently, the USDA was required by Congress to redefine what it means to be rural. So at the Department of Education, we have the Rural Student Achievement Program, and it has two wings. Schools, 600 students or less, and then rural low income, which is larger. Well, at USDA, their default definition for rural is 50,000, population 50,000. To me, that's not very rural, but what it does is it allows these programs to be very flexible. It allows communities to work together across these programs. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. Now, if there are parts of your state where they don't have any infrastructure at all, they don't have a connection at all, they have a program called Community Connect that does exactly that. It invests in the initial infrastructure buildup for the fiber connections and the internet connections that you need, and they can be over a series of years. So on the Community Connect link, which you'll probably have to search for, don't worry about it, I'm going to send Pam some direct links that she can send out to the members. But on the Community Connect link, they'll give you examples of places where this has worked. And there are places where they've had a series of grants over a series of years to establish that infrastructure to be up and running and to serve their entire community. So USDA can be the best friend for rural communities, distant, remote areas, and I'd encourage you to look into that. Let me go back to the presentation. So who has a school like this in their district? Is every school in your district like this? Probably not. And this really is old school now. This is what I remember as a Promethean board. This is an interactive board at the front of the room. Teachers can teach off it. They can access the internet. They can bring in video conferencing, video samples, etc. Students can come up and answer by touching. And it really is an engaging tool that not just keeps students' attention, but makes them think about what to do next. And this is one of the first tools that I really saw and was excited about. But think back again to when we went to Sakura, New Mexico. The teacher in a third grade class who had been in Arizona and had this experience and really had gotten great results with her classroom in Arizona was now in Sakura, New Mexico, and she was touching the board. And it was a whiteboard, but it was with magic markers. So she said, I do it out of habit. I'm trying to teach these kids in new and exciting ways and touching the board, and nothing happens because we don't have the technology here in Sakura. We have an internet connection. We actually have high speed coming from New Mexico Tech, but we don't have the tools. So again, getting back to ConnectED, trying to get those tools in everyone's hands so we can realize the vision of a more modern and 21st century classroom. So I'm going to jump ahead to this slide here because I think this slide here is very timely and something that you all can help us with. So the process is moving forward, and the first thing that President Obama did was challenge the FCC to, in fact, modernize E-rate to fund this next generation of connectivity. So the FCC actually moved very quickly, and in July they unanimously voted to approve the moving forward of modernization for E-rate. And their three goals that they set were to increase broadband connectivity, for cost-effective purchasing. So like I said, again, how can we incentivize collaboratives? How can we incentivize the industry to make this affordable and useful for education? And streamlining that administrative process of E-rate as well. I'm sure if you've done any federal programs, you'll know that would be something that's needed, and we can improve in that area. So streamline those areas. Now Monday, actually 2 days ago, the open comment period closed, but it's not too late. So that's not the bad news. The open comment period was the initial comments. I would encourage you to go to fcc.gov/E-rate now, see those comments that came in so far, read the notice of proposed requirements, and give us your feedback. Give us your comments relative to your states and your areas and what you've heard from your school leaders that can add to this conversation before the reply comment period closes on October 16th. And then from there forward, if this is something you see as valuable to your communities, raise your voice, communicate as best you can that your states and your districts need these opportunities as well. And then the FCC will move forward on the approval there. This does not require congressional approval. This is strictly through the FCC. So I'm going to stop there, take any questions you may have, and hopefully have a conversation.